would think they would be bringing special agents on special assignment from every field office across the United States to work this case. And that as Joe decides to run for president and the possibility of a real Manchurian candidate looms, that would become even more a screaming priority. Wait a second, boys. We could have a guy owned by Beijing getting ready to sit down in the Oval Office. And what do? They do exactly the opposite. They just sit on the laptop. There's no counterintelligence investigation of Hunter, no counterintelligence investigation of Joe to this day, right? It's 4 years later. To all appearances, there is no ongoing counterintelligence investigation.
For anybody who's, I think, objective and fair-minded, and we all have to come to terms sometimes with a position we may hold, a person that we may support, even a family member that we love, with the fact that there are things going on that are at odds with our personal values, that are at odds with the law. So for anybody who's objective, who's fair-minded, who has integrity, who's honest with themselves, first and foremost, you would think that they would look at this information and say, look, I want Joe Biden or I want the Democrat Party, whatever it is, to be in office, but this is a bridge too far. And not only have we not seen that in the press, but we've actually seen the opposite, because most likely, Sam, if you're aware of this at the level you are, which is very deep in the weeds, we know there are people on the other side of the political spectrum who have the same information and who have the same ability to discern fact from fiction, who are still going down this road, who are still perpetuating this fantasy that, number one, early on, that the laptop wasn't real. Now that it's at least accepted it's real, we don't hear any mea culpa. We don't hear anything. We don't even hear a justification for why, hey, we thought it was fake for a long time. It's now silent. It's completely silent. We don't hear any of that, let alone understand your admission of how dangerous this is to national security. As you said earlier, that we should be frightened, we should be terrified about what's going on if the FBI is actually part of this effort to suppress information that truly could be devastating to national security. We don't know how compromised Joe Biden or other people may be. And by the way, not only in the Democrat Party, I think this goes out to both parties. I want to be clear and I want to be fair about that. I want to be fair.
Yep.
There are plenty of people I've actually spoken about, certainly to other people, but probably even the podcast going back the last year and a half or so, about people in the Republican Party who I think are compromised as well. But right now we're talking about the chief executive of this country, the commander in chief. And no compromising could be more dangerous, obviously, than the commander in chief. So that's why we're focused on this right now. I want to ask you a little more about Patrick Ho, because he said, when we talked about this offline last week, again, it was another revelation to me. I'd read a lot about the laptop, but then I went in and started looking at him. He told me about him specifically. So you made the point about warrants, about phone taps, things like this. And this is how some of our biggest cases in American history have been broken, when you're actually focusing on the warrants for something, and then you actually obtain information that is of an illegal nature, behavior. And of course, that's all admissible. This seems like this one piece of the puzzle, Patrick Ho, the fact the FBI had gone after him vigorously, and I think rightfully, when it didn't involve a particular political figure here. But when we see that, they back off. In other words, it gets worse and worse. It's not like the FBI was just negligent. They were just lackadaisical. They weren't doing their job. They didn't listen carefully to the wiretap, or didn't read the emails. They were engaged in this type of investigation as long as it involved another entity, not in American politics, But when it came to this,
Yep.
then they turned a blind eye into it. Just how bad is it, Sam, when we see this type of behavior? And by the way, part B to that long question is, who, in your opinion, is behind this influencing of the FBI to be this nefarious?
Yeah, well, superb question, and one that I turn over in my head all the time, right? Because you hope to God that the answer is not that the rot is down to the level of the rank and file. As an old CIA guy, as I think I said to you the other day, I'm required to say disparaging things about the Bureau, just like the Bureau is required to say disparaging things about
And
the
by the way, I want
agency.
to chime in. That's like the
Like,
California Highway Patrol and LAPD. And we have the same relationship. So although we love each other when the
it's
crap
like
hits the fan, but other than that, I get it.
precisely right. Anytime the FBI calls a press conference, we're like, yeah, that's cool. We've been running the op for 5 years, and now you guys stand up in front of the camera and take credit for it. Congratulations. Okay, but that's brothers giving each other garbage.
Right.
The bottom line is I've worked with a lot of special agents and, you know, guys and gals who put their lives on the line and do superb stuff, and I have great respect for the organization. So I hope the answer is not that the rot has gotten down to the working level, but clearly, in order for the Bureau to walk by this, ignore it, bury it, you have to have the very highest levels of the organization, right? You're not conducting a counterintelligence investigation looking into how the Chinese are buying the president of Uganda and some officials from Chad, which is what the case was. And then you discover that this thing connects directly to the vice president of the United States. You don't do that and then say at the working level, make the determination about what we're going to do about this, right? That's not how that works. That goes immediately to the top and is briefed to literally the most senior guys, to the head of the Bureau, because this is as big as it gets, man. What are we going to do? So you can't claim that somehow or another this got lost in the shuffle. This was a decision that had to be made from the very top. The guy who was in charge of the counterintelligence investigation was focused on Ho and CEFC China Energy, Chinese intelligence, elite capture operations, buying influence operations inside the United States, was a guy named Charlie McGonigal. So Charlie McGonigal was the head of counterintelligence in the New York field office. Okay, so the New York field office, the FBI, is the biggest field office by far in the United States. And New York is a hotbed of espionage activities for a whole bunch of reasons, in particular because the United Nations is there. So 2/3 of the guys who are Russian diplomats, in air quotes, who get sent to the United Nations are spies. And that goes for everybody. And not that we don't do the same thing to everybody else. They come here, they got diplomatic credentials, they get out of jail free card if they get caught doing something on our soil. The worst that happens is they get sent home. And they run rampant. And of course, New York is, by virtue of the United Nations, filled with foreign officials. So it's a happy hunting ground. All of that is by way of saying, if you're the head of FBI counterintelligence at the New York field office, you're basically the top spy hunter in the United States on our side. That's what that post is because of the significance of New York. So Charlie McGonigal is at the pinnacle of our counterintelligence apparatus. He's head of FBI counterintel in New York field office. He's running the Patrick Ho investigation during the time frame when the laptop is revealed and they discover all these connections. And Charlie goes off and meets with a Albanian guy who works for CEFC China Energy. So just to connect the dots, because I know I'm throwing out a lot of info very fast. Charlie's running the investigation, investigating CEFC China Energy, which is Chinese espionage. And he goes off and meets with a guy who works for that entity that he's investigating. And he takes a massive bribe. I think it's like $250,000. Don't quote me on the exact amount. And the whole case shuts down. And in regard to the Bidens, they never go down the rabbit hole. Now, that's not conspiracy theory. That's not Sam made that up. Charlie pled and went to prison and admitted to taking the bribe. So there's no ambiguity about the meeting and who he met with and how much money he